Good day, everyone. My name is Nicky R. Vega.
I'm Sharon Urquia.
And I am Jaymar M.
So, for today's lesson, we're going to tackle about race, racism, and representation. So, before we will start, the topic will be divided into three categories. The first one is the ideology of racism, its historical emergence. Second is the Orientalism. And the third one is the anti-racism and cultural studies. So, what is race or what is racism? So, the first thing to insist on in discussions of race is that there is just one human race. Human biology does not divide people into different races. It is racism that insists on this division. In other words, race is a cultural and historical category, a way of making difference signify between people of a variety of skin tones. So what is important is not differences, but how it is made to signify, how it is made meaningful in terms of a social and political hierarchy. This is not to deny that human beings come in different colors and with different physical features, but it is to insist that these differences do not issue meanings, they have to be made to mean. Moreover, there is no reason why skin color is more significant than hair color or the color of the person's eyes. In other words, racism is more about signification than it is about biology. This should not be mistaken for a form of idealism. Difference exists whether it is made to signify or not, but how it is made to signify is always a result of politics and power, rather than a question of biology. As Gilroy points out, race has to be socially and politically constructed, and elaborate ideological work is done to secure and maintain the different forms of racialization which have characterized capitalist development. As Stuart Hall points out, there are three key moments in the history of race and racism in the West. These occur around slavery and the slave trade, colonialism and imperialism, and 1950s immigration following decolonization. It is important to understand that race and racism are not natural or inevitable phenomena. They have a history and are the result of human actions and interactions. But often, they are made to appear as inevitable, something grounded in nature rather than what they really are, products of human culture. According to Gilroy, there's need to be a reduction in the exaggerated dimensions of racial difference to a liberating ordinariness, adding that race is nothing special, a virtual reality given meaning only by the fact that racism endures. In other words, without racism, there would be little meaning to the concept of race. It is racism that keeps the concept alive. What needs to be recognized is the banality of intermixture and the subversive ordinariness of these countries' convivial cultures, in which race is the strip of meaning and racism just an after effect of long-gone imperial history.
The ideology of racism is historical emergence. So what is ideology? Ideology is the set of ideas and belief of a group or political party. So what is racism? Racism is a poor treatment or violence against people because of their race, or the belief that some race of people are better than others. So racism first developed in England as the defense of slavery and slave trades. It first emerged as a defense of ideology, promulgated in order to defend the economic profit of slavery and slave trades. According to Peter Fryer in 1984, English slave trades, English sugar-producing plantation slavery, and English manufacturing industry had begun to operate as triply profitable in locking system. The economic basis had been laid for all of these ancient crafts, or method of prejudice, be woven into a more or less coherent racist ideology. Judge Edward Long, in his book History of Jamaica in 1774, has popularized the idea that black people are inferior than white people. This suggesting is the slavery and slave trades were perfectly acceptable intuition. So, he stated that in Jamaica, white people are higher than black people. According to Charles White in 1795 made similar claims, the white European, being most removed from brute creation, may on account be considered as the most beautiful of the human race. No one will doubt his superiority and intellectual power. According to Samuel Strait, agreed that black people should be prevented from entering the country in order to preserve the race of Britain from stain and according to John Scattergood in 1792 agreed that if slavery is allowed to end, the Negroes from all of the part of the world will flock hither mixed with the natives spoiled. The breed of our common people increased the number of crimes and criminals. By the 19th century, it was widely taken for granted that all of the human race was divided into superior whites and inferior others, which such natural gift. Moreover, Freer points out, racism was not confined as the harmful crux. Virtual, eventually scientists and intellectuals in the 19th century, Britain took for granted that only people with white skin were capable in thinking and governing in 1984. Sir Harry Jensen in 1899, who had worked as a colonial administrator in South Africa and Uganda, claims that the Negroes in general is born slave, with the natural capacity to toil hard under the hot sun and unhealthy climate of the thyroid city. Hunt agreed that although the Negroes is inferior intellectually to the European, he or she becomes more humanized when his natural subordination to the European than under any of the circumstances. In fact, as he made clear, the Negro's race can only humanized and civilized by Europeans.
Orientalism. Edward said in one of the founding texts of post-colonial theory shows how a Western discourse on the Orient or Orientalism has constructed a knowledge of the East and a body of power knowledge relations articulated in the interests of the power of the West. Orientalism is the term he uses to describe the relationship between Europe and the Orient. In particular, the way the Orient helped to define as its contrasting image, idea, personality, and experience. He also tries to show that European culture gained in strength and identity against the Orient as a sort of surrogate and even underground self. Orientalism can be discussed and analyzed as the corporate institution for dealing with the Orient, dealing with it by making statements about it, authorizing views of it, describing it, by teaching it, settling it, and ruling over it. There are basically two imperial plot structures. First, stories that tell of white colonizers succumbing to the primeval power of the jungle and at the racist myth puts it going native. Curse of both Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse now is such a figure. Then, there are stories of white who, because of the supposed power of the racial heredity, imposed themselves on the jungle and its inhabitants. Tarzan is the classic representation of this imperial faction. From the perspective of Orientalism, both narratives tell us about people and places of colonial conquest. Hollywood's Vietnam. The way it tells the story of America's war in Vietnam is in many ways a classic example of a particular form of Orientalism. America's most unpopular war has become its most popular when measured in discursive and commercial terms. Hollywood has invented Vietnam as a contrasting image and a surrogate and underground self of America. In this way, Hollywood, together with other discursive practices such as songs, novels, TV serials, etc., has succeeded in producing a very powerful discourse on Vietnam, telling America and the world that what happened there happened because Vietnam is like that. These different discourses are not just about Vietnam. They may increasingly constitute for many Americans the experience of Vietnam. They may become the war itself.
And now we are on the third category, which is the anti-racism and cultural studies. As was noted with both feminist and Marxist approaches to popular culture, discussions of race and representation is inevitable and quite right, involve an ethical imperative to condemn the deeply inhuman discourses of racism. According to Stuart Hall, the work that cultural studies has to do is to mobilize everything that it can find in terms of intellectual resources in order to understand what keeps making the lives we live, the societies we live in, profoundly and deeply anti-human in their capacity to live with difference. Importantly, race must be retained as an analytic category, not because it corresponds to any biological or epistemological absolutes, but because it refers investigation to the power that collective identities acquire by means of their roots and tradition. That's all for Lesson 8. Thank you for listening, everyone.